President Trump says he will make a decision on his next chief of staff, quote, soon. The contenders now include North Carolina Congressman Mark Meadows, Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney, Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker, and Wayne Berman, a longtime Republican campaign strategist and the head of global government affairs for the Blackstone Group. Let's bring in Shermichael Singleton. He is a Republican political consultant. Right, Shermichael, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me get your take. What do you think of some of these contenders who are looking to perhaps replace John Kelly as chief of staff, and what are you looking for specifically in the president's pick?
I mean, Mulvaney, he's already said, I'm not interested. Treasury Secretary has already said he's not interested. Everyone thought it was going to be Nick Ayers. Even I sort of thought it was going to be Nick Ayers. And Nick Ayers at the last minute said, you know, I don't think I'm quite interested in this position. I think the issue is every single individual that the administration may want to seriously consider is going to look at what happened with the first chief of staff, former RNC chairman. They're going to look at what happened with John Kelly, who's almost on his way out. I mean, this is unprecedented to have two chiefs of staff in essentially 2 years. You're talking one a year. So most people are going to look at that. They're going to look at whether or not the president actually takes advice from his advisors. We know that he does not. And most people are going to say also, if I do accept this role, what will my reputation be once I leave? And so I think most people are going to be hesitant and ultimately say no. But for me, if I was advising the administration, I would probably say you have to think about someone who has that political instinct, because going into January, Democrats are going to control the House by a large margin. That means oversight, almost continuous oversight. They're going to likely be subpoenaing a lot of individuals who are current and former officials of the administration. You also got to think about what that means for various cabinet secretaries. You got to think about what that means for an agenda. You also have the president gearing up for his own very re-election. So you're going to need someone who understands Washington talk, if you will, as far as how to navigate Capitol Hill, but also how you navigate the president through a 2020 election, a re-election rather, and also how you navigate through the Mueller investigation, which is a constant thorn in the side of the administration, and they don't know what revelation is going to be revealed week by week. That's a lot for anybody.
I mean, Shermichael, that sounds like a lot for one person to navigate.
It is.
Is there such a person who exists who could do that? Because you talk about political instincts. Let's just take that portion of it.
Sure.
Right? I mean, what are the kinds of challenges when you look politically with the Democrats taking control of the House and those kinds of issues that are going to have to be navigated by the president?
Well, I mean, first of all, any individual, you're going to have to think of subpoenas continuously, constantly. The Democrats have no mandate to work with this president. Keep in mind, there's about 60% of the country who doesn't approve of Donald Trump, which is why they gave the House over to Democrats in such a large margin. Republicans also saw middle class, upper middle class women that have traditionally been a solid base of support for Republicans finally saying, you know, we don't like what's going on, we're going to cross over. So I think as you're thinking about those things, you have to think, how can I run this train on time, which is ultimately the role of a chief of staff, and set an agenda for the president that makes their president look good to the public, and also such an agenda that works for the president as he gears up for re-election. That's going to be impossible, in part because, one, the president isn't very disciplined, and two, the Mueller investigation. And Democrats are going to want to get to the bottom of things that they believe Republicans did not do and were derelict in doing for 2 years.
So on a similar note, how should the Republican Party as a whole handle the investigations into the president and his associates?
I think for Republicans it's going to be difficult, because going into 2020 there's about 18 Senate seats or a little more that are up for re-election for Republicans. If this most recent midterm was any indication of how the American people are feeling, that's not a very good sign for Republicans. But at the same time, they have to be very careful, because if you separate yourself too quickly from the president, you risk really upsetting that base who you will need to turn out in 2020 to help protect some of those seats. So I think for Mitch McConnell, as he watches this, I think it's going to ultimately depend on what comes out from the Mueller investigation. And if it's bad enough, similar to Richard Nixon, then that could give Republicans a protection they need to say, we have to start distancing ourselves from this president.
So in light of the ongoing investigations and legal issues involving former Trump associates, Washington Post opinion writer Jennifer Rubin says a primary challenge to President Trump is, quote, essential. What do you think about that?
I know Jennifer very well. She's a good friend, and I think she was extremely accurate in her most recent column. I mean, if you remember Ross Perot, and I believe, what, 91, he really was a thorn in the side of George H.W. Bush, and a lot of historians at the time, and even now in political operatives, say that it's because of him, not just Bush's increase in taxes, as we know, but it was because of Perot that ultimately handed the election over to Bill Clinton. The objective for a Republican, maybe it's a Kasich, maybe it's a Flake, the objective wouldn't be to ultimately win the nomination to become the party's nominee. The objective would be to pull enough votes away from the president, almost guaranteeing a victory from the Democrat. But the issue with that is you have to be able to raise the money. And I don't think Flake or Kasich will be able to pull enough Republican money support from those big donors to be able to do that effectively. So that will ultimately come down to someone who likely has enough wealth themselves to be able to sort of build that independent run.
Is there anyone that comes to mind?
I would argue maybe a Mike Bloomberg, for example. I think he's someone who, granted he's a Democrat, but has that business background that could pull away some more center-leaning Republicans, some independents who might traditionally be Republican-leaning voters who may say, you know, I think I'm going to go with this guy, which would really be difficult for Donald Trump. And one other caveat, let's keep in mind, Republicans barely won in Florida. Let's think about Wisconsin. Let's think about Michigan. Those are states that a Republican such as Donald Trump would absolutely need in order to win re-election again. And the fact that we lost Wisconsin, we didn't do well in Michigan, and the fact that Florida was so close, to me as a political operative, I am thinking this means trouble ahead for Donald Trump and also trouble for the Republican Party.
Let me ask you about a policy measure. A growing number of Republican lawmakers are supporting a criminal reform bill that is backed by President Trump. Okay, before you say anything, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has yet to schedule a vote despite calls from the president to do so. How critical is it for Republicans to go ahead and pass this before the end of the year?
If they don't, they won't be able to pass it. And I think when you think about the demographic shifts in this country, this is going to be a huge mistake for the Republican Party. The Republican Party is a party that has traditionally failed with targeting and outreach not only African Americans but also Hispanic Americans as of late. And I think this could have been the proper opportunity to showcase that the party does understand and get some of their critiques coming from these communities, particularly African Americans. And so I think by not doing this, what it does is in the minds of many of those constituents say this is what we already believe. The Republican Party is a party that does not only care about issues that impact us, but they are a party that many believe are a racist party. And many will point to the party's unwillingness to move forward with this piece of legislation, which I think is a catastrophic mistake.
All right, we're running out of time here, but let me ask you, heading into the new legislative year, what do you think should be the top priorities for congressional Republicans?
I think if they can, one of the best things to focus on would be infrastructure. I think that is something that should be able to get bipartisan support from Democrats because it's something that improves the economy. It sort of uplifts all people, if you will. It creates jobs. I think you would see a lot of public-private partnerships coming from such a policy position and program.
All right, as the president says, we shall see. All right, Shermichael Singleton, really nice to meet you. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks so much.